Welcome to the Korea Society's live webcast. To save her sister, a teen girl becomes entangled in a political conspiracy with an enigmatic prince. A Crane Among Wolves is a fiery new YA novel from June He, best-selling author of The Red Palace and Edgar Award-winning author of YA historicals. Born in South Korea, June spent her formative years in the USA, Canada, and South Korea before studying history and literature at the University of Toronto and working at the city's public library. Her work has been featured in Forbes, NPR, the New York Times, CBC, and KBS. And June joins us tonight from Toronto, where she lives and works. Joining June in conversation today is Ellen Oh, herself the award-winning author of The Colliding World of Mina Lee, the Spirit Hunters trilogy, and the Prophecy series, to name just a few. She's also a founding member of We Need Diverse Books, a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing diversity in children's literature. Ellen joins us from her home in Maryland. Welcome to the Korea Society, June and Ellen. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
And if you have any questions for June and Ellen, please send them via email, artsandculture@koreasociety.org. And June and Ellen, now the screen is yours.
Thank you, Jay. June, I am so excited to have this conversation. I wish it was in person, but I am like one of your biggest fans. I've read all of your books, The Silence of Bones, The Forest of Stolen Girls, Red Palace, and now A Crane Among Wolves. I was going to say The Forest of Stolen Girls was my favorite until I read this. This is my absolute favorite. This might be like, I want to say, well, technically I read it last year, so is that the best read of last year? But it's this year, so it's one of the best reads of this year.
Thank you so much, Ellen.
So I'm going to jump right in. Tell us about the inspiration behind A Crane Among Wolves.
Okay, so let's backtrack all the way to even why I began writing Korean historicals, because I feel like I need to say it. So I'm so excited about this event because I am speaking with Ellen O. And the reason why I even began writing Korean historicals is because your books existed. So way back in 2015, I got the idea to write my first Korean historical. Because for me, writing about Korea is almost like my way of reclaiming my Korean roots as a diaspora Korean, diaspora Korean. And yeah, I had this idea to write Korean historicals because I love history and I wanted to write like a love letter to Korean history. But I was so scared because I'm like, oh, I tried like searching for Korean historicals, and this was before Pachinko and before I feel like the Korean K culture wave really hit hard. And so I didn't really see too many books with Korean representation, let alone Korean historical fantasy books. And then I stumbled across your book, Prophecy series, and also the We Need Diverse movement later on. And that just like gave me so much courage. I devoured your book and I fell in love with it. And I was just like, okay, if Ellen O is able to find a market, like a publisher for her books and readers for her books, um, that gave me courage to write my own. And so you really paved the way for me. And so that's how I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited that you're here. And yeah, like even so to answer your question, A Crane Among Wolves is also a love letter to Korean history. Because for me, it's just there's such richness and complexity, and even like very dark things that happen in Korean history. And whenever I'm researching and I come across an event that I want to learn about, I kind of dog ear it for myself to write about. And so when I was researching for The Red Palace, I came across, which was my previous book, I came across the story of King Yeonsan, who kidnapped 1,000 women, and his dream was to quote unquote own 10,000 women by the end of his reign. And I was just like, wow, that happened in Korean history. And as a Korean, it's just like learning that these kind of atrocities happened in the past. It was just so shocking to me. And so I decided to write about King Yeonsan's reign as an excuse to research it, spend a year or two researching about it. So that was like the main inspiration, the history behind the book.
It's so fascinating to me because you probably like me, world history schools was mostly Western history, right? So like
Hmm.
when I was in school, I really didn't learn anything about Asian history, let alone Korean history. And for me, it wasn't until I read, all right, we're gonna go back. I'm a Gen Xer, right? I'm gonna date myself. Uh, when uh, when in 2000, Time magazine named Genghis Khan the man of the millennium. And I was like,
Mm,
oh my gosh, Time magazine put an Asian man,
mm,
man of the millennium. And I was like, I haven't actually read any biographies of him. And so I read a biography. And in that process, that's how I found all this Asian history,
wow.
specifically Korean history. And I was like fascinated by that, right? Because like I had never seen it before.
Mm,
And like just like you said, that these historical facts that come out on you, I was like, wow, why haven't we learned this before? So when I wrote Prophecy and I was trying to get an agent to represent
mm,
me, I had agents tell me, no offense, but ancient Korean history, oh,
mm.
that sounds so boring. Did you have any kind of pushback like that? Did you have people telling you Korean historicals?
So I think I published in a time where like the we need diverse moves. That was like really like I feel like reaching the peak during my time. So there was like so I feel like by the time I was about to publish in 2000, when I was looking for my agent in like 2017, 18, that was when more agents were looking for diverse books. So I actually didn't get the pushback that you received. I think like people like you and the We Need Diverse Book organization and just like this growing awareness about the importance of diversity allowed me to have a much smoother transition into publishing. I think one of the harder parts were like other agents were like they didn't know how to position my book
Right.
because yeah, my it's like it's my Korean historical. It's not about colonization. It's not about more modern day Korean history. It's ancient Korean history. So I think so. I did receive some agents being like, I like this book, but I'm not sure how to position it. So that was more of the challenge I had to overcome as a writer of Korean historicals.
But what I find so rewarding in seeing your career is that despite those challenges, you found an audience. People love your books, right? In a way that just makes me it's so heartening. And let's talk about A Crane Among Wolves in particular, because I think that you are a master at character development. Mean, Iseul and Daehyun, they are just okay. First, let's start with Iseul. I was not in love with her at first. I was annoyed, frustrated, and irritated, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you fall completely in love with the
Mm.
character. And then Daehyun is just like this complex, tortured prince that you call morally gray, and they're like perfect for each other, like really perfect for each other. Your character development is such absolute perfection that it makes me wonder, are you plot driven or character driven? And how is it that these characters are so good?
Hmm. I actually always thought character development was my weakness. So this is like really encouraging. This it's an area that I've always considered my weakness. So I'm especially like I pay a lot of attention to it because I know like plot is usually what I used to focus more on. And so in this case, I really focused on, how do I create a more complex character arc for these characters. Um, and so I had this for Iseul, I had this idea of a teenager who was very much like me when I was a teen, where it's like, I don't care about politics, I just care about my family. But then as I became more aware of the world, I like even now I'm not like the most like, oh, political person, but it's like at the end of the day, a lot of what politics is about is just having empathy for people, right? Who are not maybe in your immediate circle, being aware of the world around you and caring about others. And so I wanted Issa to go on that kind of that arc where she grows up really sheltered and privileged. Her parents are rich, and in Chosun, Korea, they grew up. Women were expected to stay homes, and when they go out, they had to wear like a veil, a changot. And so it's this. I feel like it just really captured this idea of being super sheltered, and they're not supposed to care about the world. That's how they're raised. But then when her family is basically destroyed by the king, and her sister is kidnapped by the king as well, she is forced to face what everyone around her is going through, which is the devastation of living under a tyrant. And so I wanted to show a girl who goes from being sheltered and selfish and unlikable, basically, to growing in her capacity to love more people around her and to care more about those around her. And then, so that was the main thing I wanted to show through the plot. Like, so I kind of created the plot to highlight that growth in her. And then, yeah, and then for Taehyun, um, it's the idea of, when you're in this kind of very traumatic situation and you just want to survive. It's like there's that complex, like, yeah, he's doing very morally gray things, but it's because if he doesn't compromise on his morals, he gets killed. And so it's like in that situation, do you just like do what is right and get killed, or do you like, kind of manipulate the situation in your favor? So yeah, he was a bit more complex for me, like trying to make him likable, but also have him do morally questionable things.
Love them both. And also your choice of alternating chapters and, first person versus third person. And it's an interesting thing. Sometimes an author does that, and it really can be it can be that thing that jolts you out of a story.
Mhm.
I never had that. In fact, I didn't put this book down. The first time I read it, I didn't put it down. The second time, I didn't put it down.
Oh
Right?
my God.
My butt is mad at you. Like I had a sore butt. No, sorry. Sorry about that. But no, seriously, I didn't move. Like you're frozen in place and you're just kind of captivated. You're swept into the story. But it's alternating and also in different POVs. And that's like, wow, like how did you think to do that? Why did you think to do that?
Oh, it was a challenge. It was not easy. So I was actually going to write in one POV, which I'm very comfortable with, the girl's POV in first person. But then my editor, she always loves challenging me to even grow as an author, to grow as a writer. And so she was like, how about like you write both their POV, like a dual POV book? And I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't. And so I first wrote the story through her first person POV point of view, and then I kind of wove his story in after her story was done. And so I tried to weave his story in to make it seem more seamless rather than like writing the story alternating. Yeah, I felt like that was like a struggle to really get in their story because I was like, every other chapter I'd have to step out of their brain to write the next character's story. So yeah, like just focusing on one point of view at a time really helped. And I also wanted to create I wanted to make both point of views unique. Like I didn't want their voices to seem too similar. And so I kind of cheated and just wrote his point of view in third person, because I wanted to capture that he was emotionally disconnected and he was shutting away his emotions. So I was trying to capture that like very emotionally disconnected prose, third person vibe in his point of view. And then for Iseul, she's much more in tune with her emotion and her anger. And so so I felt like first person would suit that better.
I thought that was brilliant. I also think that what by doing that, by showing us the Daehyun's view of Isul, it really made her even more likable. Like,
Mm.
that's what really helped with that. Like, here you have somebody that you're like, oh, why does she do that? Oh, and you're like, no, it's so 답답해, right? And
Yeah.
then, right? And then you see her from Daehyun's viewpoint, and she just becomes someone that you really fall in love with along with him, right?
Right.
You also have this great cast of secondary characters. It really does read like a K-drama because I have to say, what K-drama best, right? Is that you have, this wonderful main character, but you have always, well, the
Mm.
best ones, have this
Hmm.
great secondary cast of characters that really uplift the whole drama, right? And I think you have the same
Hmm.
with Wonsik and
Yeah.
Yul. Oh,
Hmm.
right. Yeah, no, knife in my heart too, but like really, I think that you did all the characters well, and showing both main characters through their perspectives also really elevates
Hmm.
their, their characters also. And I love the mystery, and you are the master of
Yay.
suspense, which I love. Uh, you write dark. Tell me a little bit about why mystery and why murder mysteries in particular.
Mm. So the very simple answer is I don't know how to plot a book without a mystery. So I think mysteries are the easiest way to get a solid plot structure because it's like this story starts off with there's a crime, we need to find the killer, and then you need to go through, X, Y, and Z steps to find the killer in the end, right? And so it's a very clear story structure that makes it easier for me to plot a book. And it gives characters very clear goals. So in that simple way, I really love mysteries. And the reason why I chose to add it into A Crane Among Wolves, so some readers might be like, oh, like I don't see why there was a need for a mystery, which valid, like they can choose to think that way. But for me, I added it in because um, there was there's this legendary Korean Robin Hood figure called Hong Gil-dong. He was known as the Robin Hood of Korea, and he would steal food from the rich to give to the poor. And he was an actual historical figure who lived in the time of King Yeonsan, which is the king I'm writing about. And I was just I I've heard about Hong Gil-dong and I heard about King Yeonsan, but I didn't know they existed in the same time period, and that King Yeonsan was actually on the hunt for Hong Gil-dong. And so I just had this idea to be like, okay, I want to write about a Robin Hood kind of figure in my book, but make him evil. And so there's like this Hong Gil-dong copycat, which is Nameless Flower in my book, and he's kind of trying to be like the Robin Hood of the time, but he's messed up. And so historically, the king was on the hunt for Hong Gil-dong, and so I'm like, okay, instead of Hong Gil-dong, I'll make it like a fictional serial killer, who is trying to kill off all of the king's sympathizers and like allies, and the heroine is trying to search for the killer in order to kind of bargain with the king to get her sister back. And so I thought it would be a good way to give the heroine also a strong motivation to like, have her after something. That she can't just be like, oh, I want to get my sister back, but what do I do? I'm just gonna like wait or something. So I thought like giving her a murder mystery to solve would like kind of give her agency and some movement in the book.
Well, it also keeps your book one of the best paced books that I've read. Right? Like,
Phew.
again, you can't put it down because it doesn't actually slow down at all. Although I think I saw something on TikTok that you posted where
Uh-huh.
there's no spice, but there's burn, or what was it
Hmm.
that you said?
Yeah. There's
That
no spice, but there's yearning.
yearning. I
Yeah.
love that. I absolutely love that. And I do think that that's a beautiful hallmark of K-dramas, right?
Hmm. I agree.
Uh, Which then takes me to my question. As K-drama saga go, do you have a favorite?
Okay, so the for me, it's the old Taga historical K-dramas that are my favorite. So Tongyi, Daejanggeum, yeah, those are like my top favorites. And Daejanggeum is Jewel in the Palace.
Right.
Yeah, like that's what really got me hooked on historical K-dramas. And then ever since then, I think the one that came closest to like those top twos was the Red Sleeve, the recent one. That was really good. The Red Sleeve.
Okay, I haven't seen that one.
Oh,
Saga
it's so good.
can get very difficult. Like I think the last
Yeah.
saga I saw and loved and hated. No, when I say I loved and hated, you'll understand. I don't know if you saw
Okay.
Lover's Scarlet Heart. Do you remember that
Oh,
one?
I, see, I can't watch it because I know it's gonna like rip my heart apart.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
loved it and I hated it.
Yeah. I get it.
You're sobbing for days, for days.
Oh, no.
Uh,
See, I don't want to stop for days.
K-dramas are so good at that though, right? You either
Hmm.
laughing hard or you're like crying hard.
Hmm.
What about modern K-dramas? What's your favorite?
Um, Modern. Right. I kind of I liked Crash Landing. I was obsessed with it, but then it got too lovey-dovey for me. I'm like, okay, they like each other. The tension is gone, but I still enjoyed it. I still watched it all and really enjoyed it. I don't think I've watched too many contemporary, so
Okay. That's fine because you write only historicals for now.
historical. Yeah,
But if one day we see a June contemporary her novel, it'll be because she's crossed over to K-drama contemporary.
exactly, exactly.
All right, well, let's go back to historicals because one of my favorite things to do when I'm writing is research. I love
Hmm.
research. I did find ancient Korean history very hard to research. Like
Hmm. I agree.
it's one of the reasons why I became an adjunct professor because I could have
Mm,
university library system at my fingertips, and that's really where I got a lot of. For me, when I was writing prophecy, I was actually researching the Three Kingdoms period, right? So it was
yeah, it was so hard. Yeah.
yeah, and Korea. So that was wow, it's hard. In some ways, the
Hmm.
Joseon period is a little
Yeah.
easier than that, but still,
Hmm.
like, what was it like doing the research?
So I totally agree with you. That's why I'm not touching like the Three Kingdoms Korea because I agree. The resources gets much more like difficult to access. Um, for the Chosen period, specifically A Crane Among Wolves, um, I had so there's like a translation. So there's like the Annals of Chosen Dynasty, which is records that are kept, very detailed records kept about the kings and their reigns. And then because Yeonsan was deposed, his isn't part of the annals. It's called the Daily Records of King Yeonsan. So you have like super detailed, like every single day notes made by historians of like what Yeonsan was up to. And then towards the end, you have like this summary of the coup that occurred. And that was the one that really helped me because it gives an outline of all the little details of what actually led to the coup and the fallout and all that. So I spent a long time trying to translate it and understand it. So that kind of became the foundational research. And then on top of that, there's like JSTOR. I rely on JSTOR a lot. And there's a lot of also like lectures I found online by Korean professors and articles because there's still like remnants of King Yunsan's reign. Like for example, my book opens up with this territory in Gyeonggi province that the king took from the people, and he was like, "This is my hunting ground now. No one's allowed inside." And then he set up these stone pillars warning people that if you pass into this territory, you're going to be executed. And so those stone pillars still exist to this day, scattered around the Gyeonggi province. And so like there's articles on that, and so I was able to draw on it. So yeah, there's because he was such a bad tyrant, there's a lot of articles on him. So I was able to rely on it. So yeah, much easier to research than, you know, Three Kingdoms. So much easier.
Was most of your research already translated, or did you find that you had to translate some yourself?
I had to translate most of the things myself. I and so like initially my translation skills was actually not very good when I began with my debut book. So with my debut, I actually relied a lot on English resources. But then with every book I write, I'm finding that the things I want to write about, like there aren't that many English translated work about it. So I am translating more, but it takes me a long time. But it's easier to understand these days.
Mhm. So actually, I'm glad you said that. For me, like it took me so many years to research Korean history. I
Mm,
mean, I'm a lawyer by trade, not like a
mhm.
historian. And a lot of the books that I needed were all in Korean. And my dad,
Yeah.
live, he was so awesome because my dad was a writer
Oh,
and he got
yeah.
books from Korea and
Oh
then
my gosh.
translated them. And you know those long post-its? Every
What?
page he translated.
No way. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, these museum type
Oh,
books. And so it's like one of my most treasured,
sweet.
like, belongings because my dad's no longer with us. But so I
Oh
have
my
these
God.
beautiful Korean books, and my dad
Hmm.
has translations in each book. So,
That's
but,
so
I couldn't have done
beautiful.
that. I'm completely illiterate. I can read my name, and that's it.
Okay, okay. All right, let me give you a trick. So I actually saw it was an idea that I took from Joan He. So she was also translating Chinese academic works. And so what I do now is I get the book and then I use Google Lens to translate, and then it gives me the gist of things. So it's like very incorrect, the translation, but then I could read more quickly, reference it and be like, oh, this kind of passage seems interesting. And then I'll actually look at the Korean text and begin translating. Because otherwise I don't have time to like go through an entire Korean academic work, books especially. And so what I do is I just use Google Lens, and I'm like, oh, and then I translate more detailed like that. So that's a cheat that I
Wow.
use.
Okay, that's a great one. I never thought to do that.
Yeah.
So, okay, given the research part, how long has each of your books taken to write?
Hmm. So my debut, The Silence of Bones, that took me several years because I wrote The Silence of Bones without having much knowledge about Korean history. So The Silence of Bones was more like my entryway, my gateway into Korea's past. I was just like, oh my gosh, Korean history is so fascinating. I want to learn more about it and I want to share about it. And so that's why it took me years to kind of build that foundational knowledge. And then for The Force of Stolen Girls and The Red Palace, it was the Red Palace was easier to write and research because I have the memoirs of Lady Haegyang, and that's the wife of Crown Prince Sado. So I have that memoir, so that was super easy to research.
And that's
Um,
already translated to English for all of you.
exactly,
I have that.
exactly. So such a good translation.
Thank goodness.
Um, yeah. So and also because I'm under a 1 year contract, I had to research faster. But then after the Red Palace, I realized I do need more time to research Korea's past. And so that was one reason why I needed that. So A Korean Among Wolves was actually supposed to be published last year, but I needed the extension to research more and draft more. So yeah, with Crane, it took me over a year of research.
And then how long did it take you to write it?
Um, so so I begin researching usually when I'm writing my other book. So while I was writing The Red Palace, I was still researching about for Crane. So maybe like a year of research, and then drafting, I'll draft like 6 months while researching. So it kind of like overlaps the writing and researching time. So I'd say it took me 6 months to draft, but then another full year-ish to kind of revise and rewrite because yeah, so initially, the last half of Train, my editor didn't like it, and so I rewrote the entire last half of Train, and the last part is actually now my favorite. So I'm really glad she told me to rewrite it.
It's perfect. I absolutely adore how it ended. I'm not no a spoiler, but I adore it. So okay, historical facts, like you said, something kind of gets your interest, and then you start to do research
Hmm.
more, and that kind of starts, right? Your train of
Hmm.
writing. And I have that same thing where one of the facts that actually kind of stuck in my head and ended up going into prophecy is the Nakwan rock, the rock of the falling flowers. It
Oh,
was
I
in
don't know.
Oh, you don't know? So it's It, during during Kingdoms period, I think the
Hmm.
Shilla, Tang, oh, they invaded Pekche, right? And then the court ladies and all of the courtesans, they were really afraid, what's worse than death when an invading
Hmm.
army comes and they just went to this rock and 3,000 of them, they say,
Oh,
jumped,
oh, yes, yes,
right?
I know that story.
And they call it the falling flowers because from a distance,
Hmm.
colorful pompoms
Hmm.
look like flowers. And I remember reading that and going, oh my gosh, that's like epic. I want to write that into a book. What, like, tidbits of historical fact kind of moved you and went into your books, or was
Hmm.
basis?
Hmm. So the main one was, King Yeonsan kidnapped over 1,000 girls, women. He actually set up an entire bureau that focused on kidnapping girls. So he would be like, so they were called Chehongsa, and they were officers that would be sent out around the provinces of Korea to, you know, um, capture women for him. And so my question was like, what happened to those girls in the end? Like, where did they go home? Like, what happened to them? So that was basically the main question that drove my entire research. And I had to like, so I went in with an assumption, but unfortunately, like, as I researched, I realized that, you know, people are messed up, and men in power, whether it's the king or government officials, people with lots of power can be very messed up. And so the answers I found weren't were heartbreaking. Um, so yeah, that was what kind of drove my research. And then another thing that kind of spoilery, so I'll just leave that out. But oh, another thing was I went I so I also went into this research with assumptions that, that this coup would be very glorious and the coup leaders would be like heroes and it would be a good versus evil. But again, as I went into research, I was like, oh, so disappointed, because they didn't turn out to be the people that I thought they would be. Um, so yeah, like researching has been really interesting because it's like I go in with these assumptions and then history proves me wrong. And oftentimes it's very disappointing to see what decisions made by those in power. So that was something that I came away with.
And did you let your authorial license kick in while writing your book? I mean, we know,
Yes.
but
Yes. So there's actually, with the King Yeonsan period, there's actually a famous love story between um Chunjong, which is the grand prince who becomes the king after Yunsen is overthrown. And it's like a tragic love story between him and he was already married when he went up to the throne, but he ended up having to get divorced. And, there's that famous K-drama, Queen for 7 Days, that's based on this love story. And so initially I was just like, do I write about this prince? But then it's like everyone knows their love story already, and I just don't want to go there. So I was just like, oh, maybe I'll just like create a fictional prince of my own. And so I used a lot of creative license there, and I just created a fake prince. Um, and I also used my artistic license when it came to the timeline of the story, because the coup kind of lasted the planning of the coup kind of lasted a few months, but I shortened it to a few weeks, mainly because I didn't want to do and then 4 weeks later with the next chapter, I didn't want to do that. I also didn't want to write a massive book. So I had to kind of play around with the timeline a bit, which I addressed in my author's note later on.
that's so cool. All right, I have a completely unrelated question. You thanked the Canada Council for the Arts.
Hmm.
How was
Oh,
that?
oh, we Canadians are lucky. Um, So there's a Canada Arts grant. So if you're a writer, even if you're unpublished, you just apply for this grant, you submit like a sample of your work, and they just give you money, like to support your writing.
I need to
And
move to
it's like,
Canada.
yeah, and it's like almost the full amount is basically enough. It's like slightly below minimum wage, but it's enough like to survive on. And so yeah.
That is so awesome. All right, okay. We're gonna start Q&A first soon, but this is a really important question because I know you're working on a new book that's coming out, and I am already dying for it. So can you talk about it?
Okay. So I like to pitch it as Pride and Prejudice set in Joseon Dynasty Korea. And it will be my most fluffiest book. Uh, my editors, my editor had to keep me in check because I was just like, Pride and Prejudice in Korea and murder. And she's like, June, no, let's keep it fluffy, no dead bodies. And so like her
Maybe
voice
it's
is in my
fun.
head as I'm writing. Maybe one trying to squeeze one in. But I'm like, no, no, no. So like I'm writing with that kind of voice in my head. I'm like, okay, let's so I'm seeing it more as a challenge, like, oh, let's challenge myself to keep things fluffy. So
Okay,
it's a fun challenge.
okay. But you'll still have some terrible people, of course, that we would
Yeah,
want
of course, absolutely. Yeah.
you write some pretty good bad guys.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, so I guess we're ready for Q&A now.
Yeah, so June, some of the viewers are asking why YA and why historical YA? Why did you
Hmm.
decide to focus on those, on that genre?
Yeah. So full transparency, I actually went into this publication journey assuming I would write adult fit for the adult market. So I wrote The Silence of Bones, my debut, as an adult fiction. But it was always about a 16-year-old girl. Because I told myself, like, I've read adult books with teenagers. So I wrote it as an adult book. Um, and then my agent just said this one line in passing, which really stuck with me. She's a Korean American, and she was like, I wish I read your book when I was a teenager. And that really stuck because I was like, I wish I read Korean historical fiction when I was a teen too. Then that might have changed the trajectory of my life where I might have embraced my Korean heritage more fully at a younger age. Because for the longest time, I was ashamed of Korean history. I thought it was like, oh, too different from the Western history I've been exposed to. So that stuck with me. And so we revised it together to make it a YA book. And then ever since then, I like the more I wrote YA, the more I realized like there's a lot of things teenagers go through that haunt us as adults, to this day. And so as teenagers, if the things we go through is that hard, I'm like, there's so much content to write about. And I've always been someone who loves the themes of home and finding a place of belonging. And that is also a very YA theme. Even adults wrestle with it to this day. And so I think that's why I'm constantly drawn to the YA market. I think I just haven't, I'm a teenager at heart. Oh, and historicals because I just love history. I've loved history since I was like 13 years old when I fell in love with Pride and Prejudice. I just love the past. I don't know why.
I'm so glad that you wrote it for YA because I honestly agree with you. If I had read Korean historicals when I was younger, I wouldn't,
Hmm.
being a child of immigrants, living in
Hmm.
a very different experience than being Korean living in Korea, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Experiences with our identity and our culture is very different.
Hmm.
Seeing those books, having that representation is so much more important to us.
Hmm. I agree.
We also have a viewer who's watching from Indonesia. So now you know that your readers are not just in the United States, Canada, and Korea. They are all over the world. Her question was, given that the Chosen Dynasty is the setting for all of your writings so
Hmm.
far, what aspects of this time do you find fascinating?
Hmm. So, as Ellen probably knows, pre-Joseon Dynasty, the lives of women was actually much different. So they had a bit more rights, like they were able to inherit their homes and so on. But after the Chosen Dynasty, the rights of women got really restricted. And when I was studying history at university, I focused on uh, the lives of women in like England and different parts of the world, but I never learned about what life for women were like in Korea. So when I began studying it, I was just so shocked that there was gender segregation. Like it shouldn't be come as a surprise to me, but I was just like, oh, that was like a severe gender segregation in the Chosun period, and it was like really intense. And then it made me realize like you see threads of that kind of restriction even to this day, and I find that connection, the idea that history continues. It's not just like, oh, Chosun Dynasty and then cut modern day Korea. Like you see influences of the past in the life we're living now and the lives of Korean women. So I find that so fascinating. So that's why I think I'm kind of stuck in Chosun Dynasty because, you know, as horrible as it was for women back then, it's for me as someone who's very interested in the lives of women, I find it very interesting. And it gives my heroines a lot of obstacles to overcome as characters trying to go out of the house to pursue justice.
Right. June, how many books have been translated in Korean?
Oh, um, right now, The Forest of Stolen Girls and The Red Palace are translated into Korean. And then we sold The Silence of Bones and A Crane. So like all my books now have Korean translations. So it's meant so much to me because I actually wrote my historicals terrified that Koreans and Korea would read it because I'd be like I felt like they wouldn't like my books, like that it would be too different, that my retelling of Korea's past would be unacceptable to them. So the fact that they're publishing translations of my work has been very healing for me as a diaspora, part of the diaspora.
That's awesome. I only have one, Finding Junie Kim.
That's amazing. That's
That was,
amazing.
yeah. And then seeing my Korean cover was possibly the most amazing feeling.
Oh my, I
It's
need
so
to get that edition now.
And I guess this is kind of related to what you just said. The story of Yeonsan and the
Mm,
Sadoseja has been covered by many different K-dramas and novels and
mm,
films. Were
mm,
you, if there was any particular inspiration for you, or were
mm.
you trying to do something different from what they were doing?
Yeah. So I actually tried to avoid for Sado Seja, like I grew up hearing the stories of him. So I kind of I knew a lot about Sado Seja when I was writing about him. But with both my works, I think I try to capture the feeling of looking at history through a keyhole. And so with Aquarium Mongols as well, we don't see history through the eyes of like the royals or the government officials, which is the narrative that a lot of Korean dramas go for. Um, I think because personally, as like someone who grew up as marginalized and also feeling like I was an outsider from Korea, the motherland, there is that kind of disconnect. And I always try to capture that feeling in my historicals where it's like you're viewing history as an outsider. So even Iseul, she's not part of royalty. She's not actually in the coup, like she's not part of the action. She's just always viewing it from the outside. And through the eyes of the commoners. So I think it's really interesting to imagine like what must history have looked like through the eyes of those whose stories were never recorded, whose voices have been forgotten. So I always keep that in mind when I'm retelling Korea's past.
You know, that's so fascinating. Do you feel like we are in that same other position as diaspora watching like the Hollywood wave,
Mm,
what
hmm
do you think?
Yeah, because I don't even know K-pop that well. And so it does feel like I'm kind of like viewing this whole phenomenon from a distance. So yeah, it's been interesting. I do feel that kind of distance as well.
I love K-pop. I mean, like going back to
Me too.
first gen K-pop, like total big fan of it.
Me, it's
But
K-dramas.
and I love K-dramas. Although, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm like literally remember like here in the States, I don't know what it was like in Korea. We could only watch K-dramas by borrowing VHS
Yeah,
tapes.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
tons of them.
And you have
Like
to
I
blow
remember
it because it's dusty.
Like my parents were borrowing like 20 tapes every week, and then all the grandmas would be watching it, right? And I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh. So like that was like our experience watching K-drama. It
Yep.
wasn't
That was
us,
mine too.
right? So it's different. So it does cause that,
Hmm.
right?
I agree.
And how about if you can elaborate a little bit more on your research process, if there's um, any source that you would recommend for people wanting to learn more about Joseon or Korean history, what would you recommend
Yeah.
them other than your books?
Um, so I always recommend Epistolary Korea. And it's just a collection of let Korean primary sources, like Korean letters, written by the common people and royals and government officials, people in exile, and it's just all translated into English. And I find that reading letters is the best way to get a really good sense of what the life of people were like back then, what kind of languages they used, how they expressed their feelings, their grief, their joys. So I always recommend that. And you could buy it through Google Books, and I'm sure it's in libraries as well.
And then there's the theme of power and oppression and
Hmm.
rebellion in your book, in the storyline.
Hmm.
How did you weave these themes into the narrative fabric, and what messages or insights do you hope readers will take away from them?
Um, so for me, I think a lot of the tragedy that occurs in history and even in this book is because people want power. Um, and and I think, you know, these are about teenagers who get disappointed by those in power who they were hoping would create good change in the society. Um, and for me, it wasn't, I didn't really focus on like, oh, everything will be okay in the end. It was more like, in this time of chaos, like, how do you just find joys in the moments? How do you stick together and kind of boost the morals of everyone around you? So it was kind of focusing on how tragedies just they've been happening since the dawn of time. But it's like, how do you find hope and how do you continue to fight for justice even despite all the disappointment? So that was kind of the message I was going for.
And I think we have time for one more question. So why don't we go back to Ellen? Would you like to ask whatever that you didn't get to ask June
Okay,
before?
really important question. Rice or noodles?
Oh, rice.
Rice, right? Oh, thank
Rice
you.
hands down.
I don't understand people who say noodles. It's rice is life, period.
Noodles are like for special fancy days, but rice is like for every day.
Mhm. And I think like if we're gonna talk about the deeper meaning of rice, right? Like Koreans say 밥 먹었어, right? It's rice,
It's
rice.
not noodle.
It's not 국수 먹었어, right? So we're asking like how you are by asking, have you
Hmm.
had rice, right?
Yes.
Again,
Yes.
so I think that, rice, I'll always say it, rice is life. But I think, oh, one last question I have for you is this. If one of your books is made into a K-drama, which would you want it to be? You already know who you would want to star in it.
Ah, that's such a hard one. But now I'm thinking like, oh, which historical events have been done before? Like what's oversaturated? Uh, I think I think the Red Palace. Like I love A Crane Among Wolves, but the Red Palace is like the the procedural police drama. It has that vibe. It's a very straightforward murder mystery, and so I think it would be fun to see a murder mystery translated into a Korean drama because there aren't too many. Like you see a lot of contemporary murder like thrillers, but you don't see too many K dramas that are like pure murder mystery thrillers. So I'd love to see
Very cool. Any idea who you would want to play the roles for you?
that. Hmm. So there's what's his name? Utoan? Udon. He was like the main character in Our Country.
Okay.
Him. Yeah.
Okay.
But he's too old for the character in the Red Palace.
But we
So
understand
yeah.
what you're saying.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
vibe, that look is
Yeah,
what you
that vibe. Yeah, yeah.
awesome. This was so great. And I can't wait for your next book. Everybody
Thank you,
read
Ellen.
A Crane Among Wolves. It is
And read Ellen's books. They're so good.
Yes, A Crane Among Wolves is out tomorrow. Tomorrow is your official pop day. So
Yeah.
congratulations. Along with many other books from June and Ellen, A Crane Among Wolves is available wherever books are sold. So make sure you get a copy. Thank you so much for your conversation today, June and Ellen. And we wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.